He's with the government. Never understood. Yeah, I think I'm gonna do the same thing. Behind you to change out. Yeah, when he was in Korea. They live in yeah. It's now yes. Everybody maybe during the Q&A, someone will talk about what they're. Yeah. I was like, no, do all of these. Dinner. Are you a creature? That's right.
Good morning, good morning. We're going to get started here on a very special presentation. Instead of having one speaker, we're going to have 4 speakers. And this is a panel of folks that belong to the Newish to Jewish organization here at Temple Israel, right? She'll correct, Wendy will correct me when I, all the things I say wrong, Wendy will correct me. I told her she's in charge today. I'm not sure I let her have that. Now she's going to be in charge. So the panelists are going to give a little bit of their background and why they came to Judaism. And then Wendy has some questions that she will pose to the group. And then we will have an opportunity as a group to ask them questions also. So at this point, I'm going to be turning this over to Wendy Gray. She's going to introduce the panel and looking forward to this presentation.
So not a live mic yet. What's the, yeah, just don't know. It goes.
And act like a rock star, put it close to your mouth.
I mean, this is why at one time I studied singing in opera, so I wouldn't have to worry about a microphone.
Right into the microphone.
Still not loud enough. Is that better? Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. It's great to have you. Our panel today was originated, I guess I could say, as an outgrowth of a group we have at Temple called Newish to Jewish, which is a group for people who want to be actively involved in learning more about Judaism as they're in the process of converting or soon after they've converted. Now, speaking for the 4 of us up here, who all are Jews by choice, none of us went through the Newish to Jewish program. And the person who did go through the Newish to Jewish program emailed me at an early hour this morning that he has a sore throat and is coming down with something, and we thank him for not coming and giving it to all of us and wish him a quick recovery. So with that said, and knowing that we don't have that particular voice here, I thought I would talk a little bit first as the moderator to set a little bit of context about Jews by choice in general, some statistical information, some overview information, and a little bit about the process of conversion. Newish to Jewish is a special thing that we have here at Temple, but it isn't part of a mainstream part of what people normally do to convert. So I thought I'd talk about that a little bit. First, let me introduce our panelists. I'm Wendy Gray, Tom Bainbridge, Nancy Cohen, and Linda Novak. I thank all of them for being here today, and I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing their own stories of their Jewish journey and becoming Jewish, having not been born Jewish. So with that in mind, does anybody have any preliminary questions? I'm going to ask for a bit of a moratorium after this on questions until we've all had a chance to tell our story. And I'll tell mine last. So, no questions? Okay. So in searching for data about conversion, I found, and you'll be astounded by this, I'm sure, there are lots of different and conflicting figures. Anything in the Jewish community that doesn't flat out straight agree, I'm stunned. So that being said, consider these please to be soft numbers, but they create a degree of context. So as you know, the Reform movement in Judaism is the largest movement. And in terms of conversion, according to the Pew organization, there are approximately 7.5 million Jews in America, 2.8 million of whom are Reform. Approximately 1.6% of Jews are converts, with 50% of the converts identifying as, sorry, that's 54% of converts identifying as Reform. Where other movements, well, conservative movement has lost membership in recent years, Reform has gained. And just for the sake of simplicity here, I didn't include information about Orthodox and other, Chabad, other organizations who are more traditional, shall I say, than Reform and conservative. Interestingly enough, the numbers of converts reported by the Forward, that there are 18,000 to 19,000 converts in process. And the Forward reported that there's been an upswing since October 7th. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. And according to Rabbi Rick Jacobs, about 3,000 people take Reform Judaism's Intro to Judaism class. And that's an uptick. And according to Rabbi Sue Oren, who teaches an Introduction to Judaism class for 13 synagogues in New York, both Reform, conservative, and independent, she's doubled the number of folks in her classes from 25 to 51 post October 7th. One reason that people cited for the possibility for the change is more people are doing DNA testing. To, what is it, 23andMe, I think was one that was mentioned, and they're finding out that they have some percentage of Jewish heritage, and they're exploring more about Judaism because of that connection that they've discovered. The article in the Forward, which you can find through, Rabbi Google, has some more interesting anecdotes from people and why they've decided to choose a path of conversion. And I should say that the number of people taking Introduction to Judaism classes is not necessarily equal to the number of people who finally decide to convert, but there's a high number that. So with that said, let me talk briefly and apologize if I'm telling you things you already know. But as with much of Judaism, there's a lot of variation in the conversion process. So at the most general level, for Jews by choice, the process steps include study, often with an Introduction to Judaism class, and study with a rabbi, usually for a year or more, but not always. And so once again, as with things Jewish, it's mostly one way, but not necessarily entirely. So the study is really important. Most typically, circumcision for males, a bet din of often 3 rabbis, but it can be 1 rabbi and some observant, other observant, and I use that term loosely, Jews, a degree or more, depending on the movement into which they're converting, to observe Jewish laws and practices. A mikvah, choosing a Hebrew name and then being welcomed into the community, which can be privately or publicly. Now, in putting together this panel, I had an advantage to know, but here's a challenge for putting together a panel for people who became Jews by choice, which is that according to the Talmud, once people are Jews, whether they're born Jews or whether they are Jews by choice, they're considered Jews, and you're not supposed to ask. So, who shall I have on my panel? I ask myself. People who are Jews by choice. How will I find out since I can't ask? However, in this instance, I happen to know that all of these panelists, like me, are Jews by choice, and I would like now to ask them to tell a little bit about their Jewish story. And in Tom's case, I'm going to ask him because he has been leading the Newish to Jewish group here to talk about that as well. So,
Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I speaking loud enough? Thank you. When people ask me where I'm from, it's often a loaded question for me because I fear being othered, which I've experienced many times in my life. I often don't fit in most groups because of my very unusual upbringing. So I usually answer that question by saying that I'm a Navy brat, as the son of a Navy aviator, and that I spent much of my youth overseas, especially in Europe. So I'm multilingual, most particularly French, along with English. We came back to the US during the US bicentennial when I was 15. And I went to high school in Germantown, Maryland, which is near the DC area. After my high school graduation, my parents moved to Ohio, and religiously, my parents were very secular. So they celebrated Christmas, but it was a very secular celebration, centered mostly around the Christmas tree and Christmas presents. So I had very little religious after high school, I went to the Ohio State University where I met my first wife. And she introduced me to Judaism because she had grown up Jewish. So we got married in Temple, Israel there in Columbus by a very liberal rabbi. So he did not require that I convert. So I did not convert at that time. And I did agree, per his request, to raise my kids Jewish, which is a promise that I did fulfill. So after my first wife and I both graduated from the Ohio State University, we went into the U.S. Peace Corps. We served in Antigua in the Eastern Caribbean. So when we returned to the U.S., we settled in Dayton since I found work here in this area. And we joined Temple Israel here in Dayton. Both of my daughters were born here in Dayton. And when my daughters were infants, I became more interested in Judaism since I, made this promise to raise my daughters as Jews. I became more interested in Judaism and took a basic Judaism course at Temple Israel. So if my memory serves me correctly, I believe Nancy Cohen was actually in my basic Judaism course, isn't it? But anyway. Upon completion of my basic Judaism course, I then converted at Temple during Simchat Torah in our old building on Emerson Avenue. And Rabbi Bloom was the rabbi then. He was the one that officiated my conversion. I did have a bet din, and it was Rabbi Bloom and then two other members of our congregation at my bet din. But I did not go to the mikvah. I did not do that. So I've been Jewish now for over 30 years. Both of my daughters and my stepson completed religious school here at Temple Israel, and all of them were very involved with tithing. So again, that fulfilled my promise of raising my kids Jewish. I've been a member of Torah study here for over 30 years. I have served as a Temple Israel religious school teacher for over 12 years. I also served on the Temple Israel board of directors for 7 years. I helped develop, organize, and implement the first Jewish Cultural Festival here at Temple. And, at that time, Nancy was the president. She co-led that effort.
Oh, Bill needs to do that. Your microphone.
Okay, so I'll repeat that. I helped develop, organize, and implement the very first Jewish Cultural Festival here. I was on that committee, and Nancy Cohen was president at the time, so she, along with Rabbi Sophia, led that effort of the very first Jewish Cultural Festival. Over a year after I got divorced, my second wife and I got remarried here at Temple Israel, which our marriage was officiated by Rabbi Sophia and Rabbi Karen Bunnyhouse. My wife Julie and I have been very active here at Temple. And my wife Julie was on the religious school committee and also currently serves on the board of directors. She's also covered. Julie's also covered. So we have been very involved here at Temple in many different ways. A few years ago, Carol Graff and my wife Julie and I met, and we brainstormed and came up with this idea of the Newish Jewish group. So I pitched the idea to Rabbi Karen, and the group was formed. The concept of the group is to basically support and educate people who just converted or are in the process. And that also includes people who are just interested in Judaism in general. We don't make any requirements that you have to convert or reconvert. So we do programs quarterly, so about 4 times a year. We now have about 30 people in our group. Keeps growing, thank goodness. It warms my heart to see Newish to Jewish group members become very involved in Temple. And many of them have been very involved with the Jewish Cultural Festival, so I'm happy to see that. This year, one of our group members also decided to become a religious school teacher and is currently here today teaching the children of our temple congregants. So very happy about that. So in closing, I was recently asked why I chose to be Jewish. And for me, the narrative in the Torah that resonates the most is being a stranger in a foreign land and the journey of going from slave mentality to freedom. As stated in the Torah, I know the feelings of the stranger, and also I know what it feels like to have my spirit crushed. So what appeals to me most about Reform Judaism is that I believe that we are in the process of completing the work of creation by being God's partners in healing our broken world. Each of us humans has a role to play since we are created in the image of the Lord. Also, I believe in progressive revelation, which is a guiding principle of Reform Judaism. So thank you for listening, hearing my spiritual journey to Judaism, which I see as a return.
Before I get to my specific story, I have to comment on a few things Tom said. Number one, the Newish to Jewish program, I think that has been amazing. You deserve every accolade for brainstorming that and bringing that to fruition. I know it's helped a lot of people. Sadly, we were not in the same class because we didn't get involved at Temple at all until we were in this building. So anyway, whoever that woman was, you thought was me, somebody else. Thirdly, I just need to brag that Tom and his wife Julie met at our house. So it wasn't trying to fix them up. It just happened. So anyway, that's one of my claims to fame.
We hear you.
So I grew up in Kettering. My family, we attended Westminster Presbyterian Church, just down the road here. I found out later that my father considered himself an atheist. My mother probably an agnostic, but they took us to church, and then, it's like, okay, you did your thing, and that really wasn't a part of my life after that. I met Rich in the 80s. He was born Jewish. It was obviously an important part of his life. He wasn't super observant, but being Jewish was important to him. So when we planned to get married, we were living in Pennsylvania at the time, and he felt really strongly that he wanted to have a rabbi marry us. But he also told me, you don't have to convert. I want you to do it if it's meaningful to you, but this is not something that you should be doing just in order to marry me. That was good. He was worth it, but I was glad I didn't have to do something I wasn't ready for. So with quite a bit of effort, he found a rabbi who was willing to marry us. And like Tom mentioned, the rabbi said, number one, I had to learn about Judaism, which I did. It was very interesting. And we promised to raise our children as Jews. So anyway, fast forward more than 10 years, we've moved to the Dayton area. We lived in Beaver Creek, and our son Daniel was 4. So we were kind of past due on that promise to raise him as a Jew. Marcia Cox was a very good friend of my mother's. I know many of you know Marcia. And she gave us a little nudge through my mother, and through that process, then we enrolled Daniel in a religious school here at Temple Israel. And he was a very enthusiastic student. He loved coming here. I mean, it was huge to him. And for him to find out at age 4, you mean I'm Jewish? This is just amazing. He was funny, how excited he was about it. But I was still, even though I had learned a bit about Judaism as a part of, the process when we got married, I was still pretty ignorant. So Rich and I both enrolled in the basic Judaism class here with Rabbi Glickman, which was a really, really good class. It opened my eyes a lot. But even then I told myself, I'm just being a good mother. I'm learning what I need to know so I can help my son, but I'm not converting. That's not what I'm doing. I do have one specific memory of this class, and I was gonna ask Tom if he remembered it, but obviously he was not in the class. There was a woman in the class, no idea who she was, who stood up in the class and said, if you're not born Jewish and you convert, the Jewish community will never accept you. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know that. I'm sure there were people in the class who were horrified to hear this. I told myself, well, I'm not converting, so okay, I don't have to worry about that. So we learned more. Daniel continued in religious school. We started to get involved in activities here. We went to some services, went to potlucks and other activities. We met other parents of kids in Daniel's class. And we started to feel like we were part of the community. And despite what I had heard in that class, we were welcomed in ways that I never imagined that we would have been. We were really, really embraced by the community. And little by little, as we became more involved, to my surprise, I realized, oh, this kind of feels like me. This feels like what I want to be. And many of the things that Tom said, just in terms of creating a better world, all of those ethical parts of Judaism really resonated with me. And I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to do more than be Daniel's mother and Rich's wife here. So I'm a slow learner. So I took another basic Judaism class. This was, by that time, they were doing the class through the synagogue forum. So we got to have classes taught by all of the rabbis, which was a really good experience too. I'm glad I got to do that. I started to study Hebrew. I started to study with Rabbi Gruber. And that culminated in my conversion, which was more than 25 years ago. I'm not sure exactly how long ago it was. And had the Beit Din with Rabbi Gruber, Rabbi Mark Zash, Rabbi Press. Went to the mikveh, and there was a service where I was called to the bima at the end of the conversion process. And, well beyond worrying that I wasn't going to be accepted, I had a cheering section of friends there who were saying, all right, Nancy, as I held the Torah. It was pretty amazing. And I, just to make clear, never in my time in Israel or in the greater Jewish community have I ever felt that I wasn't accepted because I was a convert. Many people probably don't know that I was a convert. I've been embraced and encouraged to find my place and find ways to contribute to the community. And made a whole lot of friends along the way. During, the last 25 years, I've been part of some committees, religious school, worship and music committee. I was really excited to be part of the Synagogue 2000 team. I celebrated my bat mitzvah along with 10 other women, including Wendy, which was an amazing experience. It was, I think, as far as I know, the only group was all women. So it was a Benot mitzvah in the early 2000s. It was a wonderful service. And I was honored to serve as Temple Israel's president from 2009 to 2011. And as far as I know, I'm the first person who was not born Jewish to serve as Temple Israel's president. But since we don't ask, maybe that's not true. I shouldn't brag about that. So that's really kind of my story. And I never would have expected when I first started coming, just first walked into this building to take Daniel to religious school that I would be where I am now, where I would have been able to, just be a part of the community in the way that I am.
I think we share a lot of the same things, the same experiences. What I'm going to talk about, I had previously done for the Interfaith Women back in September. So this may be a little more information than you all need, but for those ladies who weren't Jewish, most of them were not, it was more informative. All right, so good morning. A little over 50 years ago, I became a Jew by choice. Before I go into my story and the conversion process, let me preface this by saying that things have changed in the last 50 years. I will share my experience with you, then point out the differences that took place over the years. My story starts out like many others that have converted. I met a wonderful, charming, funny, handsome young man who happened to be Jewish. I, on the other hand, was raised Catholic by a very devout mother and non-religious father. I met Mike while working at Elder Beerman during a summer break from college. As fate would have it, we fell in love and decided to marry. This decision brought our religious differences to the forefront. Believe me, we had many a serious discussion regarding the wedding ceremony, how children would be raised, and living a life that was fair to both of our beliefs. Neither Mike nor his parents ever suggested I convert to Judaism, while my mother automatically assumed that any children we have would be raised Catholic. Mike had been raised and had his bar mitzvah as an Orthodox Jew. However, at this point, he was a non-practicing Jew, while I was a practicing but questioning Catholic. So we married in the Catholic Church on a Saturday evening after sundown, so his relatives could attend. A priest married us. At that time, no rabbi would take part in a marriage of a Jew and a non-Jew. All was well, and we started our married life together. However, there was a fly in the ointment. That fly was me. Our life together progressed, and as I began to learn more about Judaism and its practices, I felt drawn to learn more. Here is a passage that spoke to me as I was preparing for this talk. A rabbi tells a potential convert that we are all created with a Jewish soul, but some get lost in the transition of birth. The fortunate ones find their way home. I felt like I was finding my path home. Having made this decision, Mike and I decided converting through the Reform movement would be the direction to take. So off I went to meet with Rabbi Weisenbaum at Temple Israel. It was a scary moment for me. This was a very big decision, and I needed to convince the rabbi that I was sincere in my quest. We had an earnest discussion about the reasons for wanting this and how did I see this affecting my life. Rabbi Weisenbaum explained that I would need to attend classes for about a year, read and write about the assigned materials, attend services, get to know congregants and the language of the service. I would have to do things to cement the experience. Now for the hard part. I would have to tell my very devout mother that I was converting to Judaism. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. My mother was hurt and felt she had done something wrong, far from the truth. My father felt bad because my mother was hurt. I will say that, of course, this feeling passed, and both parents participated in many a Jewish celebration at our home. That done, I also had to share the information with the principal of the parochial school in which I taught. Also a difficult moment, but it was agreed I would finish out the year and there would be no new contract for me, which I totally understood. Next, relatives and friends needed to hear it from me. Reactions went from shock to, what about Christmas? What about Jesus? What about bacon? Throughout this process, Mike was very supportive. My decision to convert was going to change his life too. He now attended the classes and services with me and had to become a practicing Reformed Jew, a change for him, but one he took on wholeheartedly. Going through the conversion process is like being a trapeze performer, taking a giant leap from one identity to another. To help foster that new identity, you need to have the congregants willing to answer questions on worship rituals, traditions in the home, share recipes, and in general, ease the path to Judaism. More about this as I talk about the more current practices. My year of reading, learning, and practicing Judaism was coming to a close. Finally, it was time for the actual conversion ceremony. My conversion took place on a Friday evening after the regular Friday service. The rabbi, myself, family, and friends went to the small chapel in Temple Israel, where I stood before the ark and recited the Shema in Hebrew. This prayer condenses Judaism into one sentence. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. I took the Hebrew name Ruta bat Nechael, Ruth, wife of Michael. The rabbi confirmed my conversion, a certificate was signed, and that was that. Finally, I was home. If you recall, I told you I would share with you the changes made in the last 50 years. First of all, one of the things I admire about Reform Judaism is that it changes with the times. During my conversion in the late 60s, early 70s, it was really Reform, with more English in the service and not as much emphasis on ritual. Because of this, some of the rituals that are now practiced or a prerequisite for conversion were not stressed back in my day. The rabbis have now come to understand that ritual strengthens legitimacy. Also, I am relating this as a Reform Jew, but the basic steps would be the same for the Orthodox and conservative branches. Earlier, I spoke of the importance of having a mentor or someone to help you through the conversion process. At Temple, we have formed a group called Newish to Jewish that includes would-be converts, newly converted, and Jews by birth. This group meets periodically to help participants understand the holidays. For example, how to put together your first Seder, how to deal with Christmas, Hanukkah in your home, and of course, answering any questions that may come up during the discussions. This group has been proven to be a much appreciated educational tool for the soon-to-be or newly Jewish individual. Now for the updates I have promised. The first one, the Brit Milah or bris, would actually have been done during the period I converted. This is a practice of circumcision that goes back to Genesis 17, when God commands Abram to circumcise himself and all the males in his household. It is at this point that Abram becomes Abraham and identifies as a Jew. The practice of a bris continues to this day as a first step in becoming a Jew. If the would-be convert is already circumcised, then a small prick is made on the penis, just enough to draw blood. That act fulfills the commandment. If the candidate is not circumcised, then that procedure must be completed before conversion. Since this first step applies only to men, it was not part of my conversion process. The next step, the Bet Din, is now one of the 3 final steps toward conversion. The Bet Din consists of a panel of ideally 3 rabbis or 1 rabbi and 2 knowledgeable, observant members of the congregation. The purpose of the panel is to call forth the candidate and pose questions similar to the questions the rabbi asked the would-be convert at the start of the process. They want to make sure the individual is sincere in their desire and not being coerced in any way. They may ask questions about what kind of Jewish life they are now living and how they see their future Jewish life. After the questioning period, the judges excuse themselves and confer as to the sincerity of the candidate. I can't imagine someone being rejected at this point, but I am sure it has happened. This is one of those rituals that was not thought to be necessary 50 years ago. Today it is because, again, ritual strengthens legitimacy. The final step in conversion is the beautiful one, immersion in the mikvah. The mikvah is a body of water that meets halakhic Jewish law standards. The candidate must be naked, no glasses, no dentures, and for women, no makeup. In a spa-like setting, the candidate recites 3 blessings and immerses themselves fully after each blessing. The rabbi must be present to witness the full completion of the ceremony. Another sentence that jumped out at me as I was writing this is, some Jews are born from the womb and some are born from the mikveh. That sums up the feeling of rebirth as you fully enter into Jewish life. While choosing Judaism was a big and life-changing decision, I have never regretted it. For as Vicki Carroll states, Judaism suits me, it answers my questions, it resonates in my heart as well as in my mind. Thank you for your kind attention.
Right, so I had not anticipated telling my story today, but since I'm here and I have become the 4th panelist, I will do my best to do that. Is that better? I just have to swallow this mic. Next stop, rock band. So I have to say that so many of what my fellow panelists have said is also true for me. At one point during my conversion process, when I asked Rabbi Glickman why I felt that Judaism fit me so well when other religions I had tried out had not, he said, some people are just born with a Jewish soul. And that was very comforting for me. I wanted to mention, because I didn't convert because of a relationship. So I was the iconoclast in my family who, it wasn't really what it looked like, but it looked like one day just up and decided that I wanted to be Jewish. It actually was the culmination of many years of spiritual seeking. I was born into a Protestant family. My father's grandfather was a Methodist minister and prominent in Toledo, Ohio congregation, and in Methodist leadership. And back in those days, Methodists didn't play cards or dance. It sounded like a lot of other Protestant religions that were very conservative at the time. Although I liked going and singing the hymns, that part of singing with a group I still, that hasn't left me despite my religious change. I just found that Protestantism was a little new. It turns out I'm very interested in origins of things. In college, after a long explore, I converted to Catholicism, which seemed more original Christian than post-Reformation Protestantism. And that began to lose its luster after the very liberal Pope, who died very shortly after his rise to the papacy, was replaced with a very conservative Pope, and I felt sort of trapped back in a place that wasn't as progressive as I was hoping it would be. And so the search continued through other groups that I didn't necessarily join, but through Episcopal Church and Lutheran Church. Unlike my sister, I didn't explore Eastern religions. I had enough of learning about that through watching her. And I just felt again, things weren't quite original enough, going back further. So when I read a book by Rabbi Harold Kushner called To Life, which is a book about Judaism. And I started the book and I said, wait, yeah, this is what I'm looking for. And then I read the next chapter and I had the same reaction. And I read the next chapter and I had the same reaction. So at that point, we were living here in Dayton and I contacted, I'm not sure, I think it was because I was looking around for what I could do in order to learn more about Judaism. And I found out about the Introduction to Judaism class here, and I contacted Rabbi Bloom. And Rabbi Bloom asked me the same question that was the biggest question that I was asked the whole time I was converting, which was, why? You're not in a Jewish family. You're not married to somebody Jewish. Rabbi Bloom said, so did you have like a really good friend who was Jewish? And I said, no. And he said, is someone encouraging you now? And I said, no. And I explained this historical thing, and I said, when I read the New Testament, it seemed like the way Jesus acted in the New Testament, not the subsequent interpretations in the New Testament, but the way Jesus acted, you know, be kind and the Sermon on the Mount, all of those things. I said, that really attracted me. Those values really attracted me, but it doesn't seem to be what really happens. However, it seems that a lot of these same things are echoed in what I now know about Judaism. He said, so we have Jesus to blame for you becoming Jewish. Yeah, basically. So, and it's part of that, I have to give enormous thanks to my husband, to whom I had been already married for more than 20 years. My husband Guillermo, sitting back there, who, when I told him this, was willing to allow me to change our family, because by then we also had a young son. We had an older one already grown up who wasn't involved in this process, but to raise our young son Jewish, and that discussion happened because I said, I want this child to be raised in some religion. Do you want to raise him Episcopalian, which is essentially his background, or am I going to raise him Jewish? And he said, well, I think you better do what you're going to do, because I don't see that I'm going to be able to make this work. So he's been extremely supportive throughout this Jewish journey, and I have many thanks to give to him. I converted in 1997 here at Temple Israel, having studied with Rabbi Glickman and Rabbi Bloom. I remembered this morning that somewhere deep in some file cabinet is a letter that I wrote to Rabbi Bloom about why I wanted to convert, and that would have been really nice to have. But in 1997, I didn't have my Mac to save files on, and so it's probably on a 3.5-inch floppy disk somewhere. The community here welcomed me with open arms, and I had great support here. After and including our Bar Mitzvah class. And then we moved to rural Virginia, where there was no Jewish congregation for about an hour's drive. I did attend one congregation in Lynchburg, where I learned, and I was really stunned. I don't know how I can be so naive sometimes, that not all congregations are as wonderful as Temple Israel. So I didn't have a Jewish affiliation, and we weren't able to provide a bar mitzvah for our son Dominic, but thankfully he has affirmed his Jewish standing and is not practicing much in Spain, where he is. There also isn't much of a Jewish community. I think there were like 50,000 Jews in Spain altogether, and none nearby where he is. And of course, Spain would be part of a Sephardic movement, and a Sephardic movement never had a reform aspect to it. So it would be much more traditional. Thankfully, in 2021, we moved back here, and once again, Temple Israel welcomed us with open arms, and I could not be happier to be a member of Temple, and honored to serve on the Temple's board, and sing in the Jewish chorale, which will be singing for Shabbat Shira this coming Friday. I know you all want to be here. A week from Friday? The 7th? The 7th. I don't know how this January has like 10 weeks in it, but anyway. A week from Friday. So with that, as me being the person who didn't have a Jewish family to start with, I would like to ask the panel, this is something that didn't come up, how do you honor holidays with split families, whether it's immediate or extended families? So what about Christmas and Hanukkah? Anybody? Okay.
When I first converted, I think Daniel was 5 or 6 at the time, maybe 6. And we, bless my husband, he had agreed to have a Christmas tree in our house every year. Well, I don't think he loved it, but he did it for me. And of course, Daniel loved that too. And I remember my sister-in-law saying, "How can you take Christmas away from your son?" She was just appalled, but Daniel was so thrilled that I was converting. He wanted me to be Jewish, just like him. It wasn't a big deal to him. And we had the advantage of having my parents who lived locally, and we got to have Christmas at their house. And they would come to our house when we lit the menorah, and we went to their house for Christmas. And so we were very lucky that they didn't have any negativity toward any of those changes. It wasn't an issue, other than my sister-in-law.
Just before Nancy converted,
You have to speak up much louder or get the microphone.
well, I just want to say before Nancy converted, and we had a Christmas tree and a menorah around the time of the year. And Nancy and Daniel, in a picture of our menorah and Christmas tree, was on the front cover of the Dayton Daily News, and a story about families having both holidays at the same time. So.
I forgot about that, yes.
I'll just briefly say a few comments about this question. The first thing I want to say is that December Dilemma is one of the reasons I chose to form this group, this Newish to Jewish group. Because the December holidays are definitely, I think, for new Jews, probably the most difficult time of the year. And so I feel that difficulty. And it continues to be a difficulty within my family. The way we handle, and it's only a difficulty for me, not my children. But the difficulty for me is being fake. I just hate Christmas, to be honest with you. I hate Christmas. And so I don't like going to my family and to try to be fake because they want me to be joyful. It's the most joyful time of the year. Well, no, it's not. So anyway, but for my children, the way we've handled it is that Christmas is my parents' holiday. So they go and they help my parents celebrate their holiday. Within our home, we have nothing Christmas. No Christmas tree, no Christmas decorations. Our home is a Jewish home, but they can go to their grandparents' house and they have all the Christmas decorations and they can be there and celebrate their holiday. But for me as a Jew, I don't like going to my parents' home during Christmas. I hate it. I don't. So I tolerate it, but clearly I see myself as the party pooper at Christmas. And so that's why I spend very limited time at my parents' house during Christmas.
The first year of our marriage, we did have a small tree because I have not yet converted. I was, waxing and waning. And I was teaching at a parochial school, and Mike at the time played Santa Claus for the school. So yeah, we were back and forth, back and forth. I know that was kind of funny, but Yeah, it was yeah, at Assumption School, he was right there. But after that first year, then that was it, no more playing Santa Claus, no more trees, no more decorations. And we, like the others, would go to my parents' house, or the kids would go and help, and that was it.
Well, since I still have a son, an older son who lives here and is the father of our granddaughters, and they are non-practicing nominal Christians, I guess. It's a little bit more complicated because I wanted to not seem to dismiss that side of the family. So the compromise is we have a decorative wreath on the door, an evergreen wreath, which is, I know it's emblematic of Christmas, but it's also seasonal. And it doesn't have any markings on it that indicate it as particularly Christmas. And a little tiny battery-powered tabletop Christmas tree. And then I have been lucky enough to accumulate quite a few menorahs over the year. And so I just can put out multiple menorahs to kind of drown out the Christmas tree. And since the family's not there during Hanukkah candle lighting, although they'd be welcome to be, but it just hasn't worked out. That seems to have worked to assuage things. Our granddaughters are older now, and it's not the same as with little kids who really expect to see certain things on Christmas. And we go over to our son's house to celebrate with them. But as I said, since they're not particularly religious, it's a secular celebration. That son, Sean, was also born on Christmas Eve. So that all wraps into it. And just as Sean wouldn't want to have to give up at least the trappings of Christmas, he told us once he was old enough to talk that even though he was born on Christmas Eve, he would have a separate birthday and Christmas, and don't let anyone get confused and try to give him one present and tell him it's for both. So, let me ask this question. Is there any aspect about your former religion that you miss? And if so, what?
No, but having grown up going to Westminster, sometime in the last 5, 6, 7 years, I had a reason to be in the building for a program. And it was amazing. I mean, that is, I don't know, if all of you have been there or heard their organs. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, and the organ music is fantastic. So it's like, oh, I missed this, just in a small way. That's it.
But obviously, the short answer for me is no.
I don't miss anything that I would want to have back, but it was really interesting when we visited our younger son in Spain this fall, going to Catholic Mass in this elaborate and visiting elaborate cathedrals and churches that are just, from an artistic point of view, are just stunning. But it's possible to appreciate those without having to be Catholic. But I miss having a reason, I guess, to go into those buildings more. So one more question, and then I'll open it to your questions. Is there any aspect about Judaism, either in practice or theology, with which you were or are uncomfortable? If I were going to go first, as I interpret this question, I would say that I'm uncomfortable about the divides among movements and about people deciding who's legitimately Jewish by practice. And I'd be uncomfortable with certain aspects of traditional, what might be called, or Orthodox Jewish practice, but in the Reform movement, I have to say that the openness to so many different people from different backgrounds is a key to what I love about Reform Judaism, and the willingness to entertain. I think it was something Linda said about looking at changes that need to be made as they need to be made, is something that I think is another wonderful thing about Reform Judaism. And I consider myself to be definitely a Reform Jew.
Well, Rabbi Karen has heard me rant and rave weeks on end. I have a beef with traditional Judaism. And so it's a trigger for me, so just a warning.
Okay, fine.
So my beef with traditional Judaism is traditional Judaism does not recognize me as a Jew. And so when I come up against that, I become very emotional and I rant and rave because I am Jewish. And so I don't really want to go into it too much because, again, it's a trigger for me. So, but I'll just say, yeah, traditional Judaism, I have a big beef with.
I think I have to echo, I mean, especially what Wendy said, because I feel very grateful to be a Reformed Jew. And, you know, as we are taught, we find meaning in all of the different practices and can help to shape them to what works for us, rather than being, you know, just subject to certain things. You must do this, 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 and this, if you're not a Jew. So I don't have an objection really. I don't have as strong an opinion as Tom, although any part of a religion that does not treat women the same as men is a problem for me. But I don't have to worry about that really, because who we are.
I don't really have any, I don't really have anything aside from what you two have already said. I'm quite comfortable and quite happy with being Jewish and in the Reformed tradition.
So we'll open up for questions from you guys.
All right, so I'll start.
Okay.
What I would like to know is, from all four panel members, what forms of anti-Semitism have you experienced, if any?
Right now, the panel is.
I guess if you're thinking about it, that's good.
Yeah.
If you can't come up with them.
I would have to say yes. I have experienced it, and unfortunately, have to say within my own family. So that's what's most difficult. It's when it's within your own family, and your family rejects you, rejects you as a person, rejects you as a Jew. So again, that becomes a trigger for me. So I don't want to go too much into it because really, I'll start ranting and raving. But yeah, so the short answer to your question, but yeah, I have experience.
I would have to say no, really. But I remember when I was converting, talking to coworkers, telling them what was going on. Just one person in particular decided it was her duty to stop me. It's like, you need to think about this. And, you know, it was uncomfortable. Is that anti-Semitism? Maybe. And I made it clear that, no, you know, you're not gonna convince me. I've thought this through carefully. But there are there are people who feel that is their duty to spread the word as they know it, and whatever anybody else thinks doesn't matter.
The only time that I can honestly remember any problem we live in Union, and it's not a hotbed of Judaism, to say the least. But I would go to Union Elementary when the kids were there and talk to them about Hanukkah and make cookies and tell them, explain the holiday to them. And I had done it for a couple of years, and then suddenly the principal said, no, we're just not gonna do this anymore. And I was very offended. I don't know what his reasoning was. He was kind of old school, and I don't know if he thought it was mixing religion in where it shouldn't be, but I had done it previously, so I didn't really understand that. But that is honestly the only other time that I can even think that I've had to deal with anti-Semitism.
I think that not necessarily a direct anti-Semitic experience, but a surprising one for me was that a friend who I've maintained intermittent contact with, that we've been friends since we were 12, so that's a long time, who quite a long time ago became an evangelical Christian. And in one of our rare conversations, which tend to be very long conversations, began in the same conversation as having talked about her friends who are completed Jews. You might know this is a messianic thing. Jews who profess belief in Jesus as their savior, and Rabbi Glickman said we call those people Christians. But in that same conversation in which she was expressing great admiration, she started talking about the Jewish banking conspiracy and Jews owning all the media. And I said, wait a minute, are you aware, and a whole bunch of stuff from the Protocols of the Elders at Zion. I said, are you aware that this is all completely anti-Semitic canards that you're talking about? And she said, well, no, because it had come from some church authority. Okay, well, I think our long conversation that we're having today is just wrapping up now. So, again, not necessarily directed at me, but okay.
I believe that I am probably the antique of our synagogue as far as converts are concerned. And so I hope you'll bear with me while I say a few things. I was asked if I would do this today, and I didn't think that I could. But as I said, I'm using my excuse of age. I would like to tell you that in 1965, I converted. And it was an unusual conversion in the sense that no other Gentile woman had approached the rabbi with this kind of request. And it came because as a child, when we moved to Dayton, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. My parents were not religious. My best friend was Joyce Claren, if any of you ever heard of her. And it stemmed from this. I came to Temple Israel as a kid with her, as much as I ever went anywhere else, until my parents decided that I had to show that I was not Jewish. And so they took me to Grace Methodist Church. Anyway, that's the history behind that. And I had a wonderful time, but I also had a very confusing time, because when everybody started to go through their rigmarole that they did for, that's what I thought of it as, getting ready for their bat or bar mitzvah, they just left me out. Nobody explained why. And so therefore, I was very confused and hurt for a long time. But anyway, I want to tell you that this was not a decision that got laid aside, because as I became an adult, and experienced other religions. I tried to find what I wanted to do. I came back to Temple and I asked to take conversational Judaism to the point where it was mine. And that's what I thought of it at the time. It was something I wanted to believe in, but I didn't understand what I was learning. And so that's how it started. And I'm not going to say more because I'll just get confused. But if you ever want to talk to me about it, if you want to know what it was like for a person that grew up in the tail end of the Depression on, I'm the one to talk to. Thank you.
You asked about anti-Semitism. I was born Jewish. Grew up in Brooklyn, and then moved to Long Island, to a non-Jewish school area. And the first recognition I understood was when someone asked me, "What are you?" I had no idea what they were asking until I eventually figured out they wanted to know what religion I was. And I said, "Oh, that's funny." So then I started going to Hebrew school, and I was in 10 years old, or whatever it was. The next I remember is when I was in 5th grade, and Mrs. Riley, so this is a few years ago, was reading the Christmas story, and there were 2 other Jewish children in my class, and we weren't paying any attention because it didn't have anything to do with us. And then we got in trouble for not listening to the Christmas story. The others I remember is that tests were given specifically when they knew it was a Jewish holiday, and then they wouldn't let the Jewish students make it up. Over the years, fast forward, I moved to Illinois, where we're the only Jews, and I learned a little bit more about being different. Moved here, and we live in Beaver Creek. I live in Beaver Creek, as Nancy does, and we are, we are few and far between. In a community of over 20,000 households, if there are maybe 60 Jewish households, I think it's a lot. So we are sparse. My oldest one was in 4th grade, and the teacher said the Lord's Prayer, which I didn't find out for 2 years later. Because at that point I was at 12 and I complained, and the teacher got rid of that one. But over the years, there have been a variety of anti-Semitic indications, nothing overt, that you could actually see, or I could see. But it's in the community somehow. It's with some of the very subtle things that take place. Right.
Rather than attention.
Right, the lack of understanding. Going to a public meeting and someone says a prayer that's supposed to be to everyone in the room, and then it's in Jesus' name, and I said, well, I'm not included in that prayer. That to be felt different, even though everybody there knew. So it's just the subtle stuff over the years. It's there. This is a good place to be.
I think the change I've noticed over the years is that when I was a kid, you would be aware of who converted. You know, there would be a comment about they're a convert. But now I feel like I knew Tom converted because I was fortunate enough to be at his conversion. But like Nancy and Linda, I had no idea, you know, I just assumed people now were born Jewish or have always been Jewish. I don't think we're aware of it as much. I think it's just much more accepted, and that wasn't true when I was a kid.
I want to briefly comment about this idea of treating somebody who converted as if they were Jewish. I think there's a problem with this basic premise. It's because when somebody converts, you know, they spend a year with a rabbi, and that's what they learn about Judaism. Is that they spend a lot of time intently learning about Judaism. And all of a sudden, it feels like you fall off a cliff, right? So that is one of the reasons why this Newish to Jewish group was formed, is because we don't want people falling off the cliff, right? If nobody pays attention to somebody who is still learning, they need the support. They need people coming in and explaining what's going on, right? It needs to be more of a continual process, but you're not just falling off a cliff. All of a sudden, people treat you as if you've been Jewish your whole life. No, you haven't been Jewish your whole life. You've only been Jewish for a year, and you need to learn what it means to be Jewish, and you need help in that process. So that's why this group was formed.
But we all know that a lot of converts know a lot more than what we learned growing up at Sunday school,
I get to know who's getting converted or not, because I have a very important job that I appointed myself to. I choose who lights the candles on Friday night. And the rabbis told me it has to be someone who is Jewish. And I think one of the nicest things I have learned over the process is who's going through is the rabbis let me know. And it seems to be a great honor that as soon as the conversion goes through, they want to light the candles. That is something that is very meaningful as being a full part of the community. So that's how I know what's going on. And with the Newish to Jewish, as Tom said, we sat down. It was during COVID, and we were outside in the open air at parks, so we weren't going to be hurting each other. And what was interesting to me, having grown up with all the rituals, we practiced Shabbat, we lit the candles, we had the challah, we had the chicken soup and the matzo balls, that was traditional. We just knew, because that's what you did. And he brought forth the fact that those who converted, and actually my second husband went through conversion. He was, I think, like 65 when he went through a conversion. And it was conversion because he was living with a Jewish woman. The practices. We commonly talk about latkes for Hanukkah. Well, if you haven't grown up with latkes, you don't even know what it is until the say is potato pancakes or knedel. I constantly have to translate knedel for my non-Jewish people who have not grown up with the terminology that we assume is part of our practice. And I think that's an important part that the Newish to Jewish group is bringing in, is these are what people are talking about. This is what they've been, the traditionalist practices have been, and bring them up to, individual up to speed and inclusion. How do you make hamantash? Or why? If you don't know how to make it, let me tell you, it's a chore teaching people how to do it. But it's part of our tradition, and I think that's one of the things that is important for us who are members of our congregation, with the newer people coming in, to share with them the traditions with which we have grown up, so they feel really fully inclusive and understand what we're participating in.
Many years ago, when I first started teaching in the religious school here, somebody who was very involved, very active in temple, I'm not going to mention who it is, remarked that, and was also involved in religious school, remarked that she was kind of concerned that there were a couple of teachers in the religious school who were Jews by choice. And yes, they know stuff, but they can't convey the Yiddishkeit, Jewishness, the traditions to our students. And in a way, obviously, that's true to some extent. But I guess as I've gotten older, I've realized that, we have a lot of people who are very active, who are Jews by choice, and something, we're shifting somewhat, and that's just nature. Things change and yes, people who are new to Judaism should enjoy learning the traditions and following them, but they're also going to bring other traditions, and they're going to change things. And that's just the way life goes on. You can't just stay in one place, particularly for home use.
I want to briefly comment about that as well. Sorry to take up so much of this space, but my very first year of teaching religious school, I've probably been a convert, I think probably a couple of years. But one of the parents of one of the students in my class, keep in mind, I'm only teaching second grade at this point, right? One of the parents met with me and said they were concerned that I was teaching their child and that I did not have enough Jewish knowledge to teach their child. Second grade, right? So, I was really hurt by that, right? That somebody would come and question me about being able to be a teacher here in our religious school of a second grader. So I just want to caution all of you who are here today that sometimes, even though there's this general principle that a convert is fully accepted in the community, that actual in practice, it doesn't turn out that way very often. And that sometimes, us converts feel rejected by our own community. And so, and it's very subtle things. It's not necessarily questioning whether I have the right to teach your child. So just be aware that sometimes, even though there's this general principle, it doesn't always work out that way in practice.
Well, let me comment. My experience, and I was born Jewish, I was born in this synagogue. My parents were married in this synagogue by Rabbi Russlander in 1949. And so I've not known any other Jewish organization. But one of the things that I realize is how special this congregation is. And it has always been welcoming, from Rabbi Russlander, Rabbi Weizenbaum, certainly Rabbi Bloom, who married me and my first wife, so I've been married twice in this synagogue, and both times my wife wanted to convert and I didn't pressure her to do that. So from this synagogue's point of view, or from the Jewish point of view, I'm +2 with wives. But I'm not doing it again, I'm not getting married. Okay. So +2 is my limit. So all of the rabbis, through Rabbi Karen, and Rabbi Karen's, one of her main pillars is inclusivity. And it has, the culture of this organization, from all these prior rabbis through the present rabbi, shows how inclusive we really are. And so I acknowledge that Tom has had some experiences that weren't as positive as they could have been from congregants. But I will tell you, from my perspective, I've never known if somebody was a Jew by choice or born Jewish. Only when that would come up in any conversation or something like this, I wouldn't know these things. And I know that most of the people that I interact with in this congregation have no bias at all where that's concerned. I mean, when I didn't know Linda was a convert, I didn't know, you got two former presidents right there. And I didn't know they were converts until their presidency, however that came up. I'll make another comment. I retired from my primary job last summer. I did that job for 46 years at the base, either as a civil servant or as a contractor. And I will tell you, every quote, party that we had, or gathering we had, whether it was official or unofficial, they had an invocation, that somebody would give the invocation. And most people know here that I'm not a very shy person. So when the invocation, at the end, everything sounded great until the end. And what was the words? Jesus Christ. Okay. And so I would go up to them afterwards, and I would point out to them that you were very inclusive all the way to the end, but you didn't talk for not just me, but others who may not be Christian. And I would have thought naively years ago that if you provide people with information that is true, that they would change. That is not the case. I've learned that people will not change until they are forced to change. And so that happened all through my 46 years going to get-togethers related to my job. So because I am an officer at this synagogue and am involved in a lot of the daily goings on, I am continually impressed that we are blessed to have the leadership that we do, the employees that we do. If you ever go into our office, it is a family atmosphere. And that just doesn't happen by chance. So that has to do with the culture that has been inculcated into us all these years and continues to this day because of Rabbi Karen's leadership.
Thank you. I just wanted to say something really quickly as I have a class I'm preparing for real quick, so I don't want to ask a question and leave. But first, just one statement, because as someone who works a lot with people going through the conversion process or exploring the conversion process, even those who go through it and choose it's not for them, I know that it takes a lot of vulnerability to sit up there and to share your stories, and probably a little bit of fear of, will they see me differently now that they know? Or what kind of conversations am I now going to be a part of that I wasn't expecting before? And I just want to say thank you for making yourselves vulnerable and allowing to share such a personal journey. On behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you. The other thing I want to say is that I think that more questions about your Jewish identity do not come from anti-Semitism and outside. But I think often, as we were starting to talk about, it comes from within the Jewish community, unfortunately. And that doesn't necessarily mean within Temple, but within the Jewish community at large, you know, from local to Israel. And I think it would be helpful for us as a congregation to be your allies and to know how to be your allies as far as when we hear certain things or when conversations come up. What do you wish that people would say on behalf of people who make comments about those who are studying for Judaism, who become Jewish by choice, or perhaps whatever movement they've chosen to become Jewish with it? If you have anything to say about that.
Well, I'll make a comment about Rabbi's statement before we go on to the next. I would have to say that in general, if you know somebody's going through a conversion process, realize it's a difficult process because you live in two worlds. You live in the world that you were and the world that you're going to be. So often the world, both of those worlds may reject you. And so you have to be aware of that you may possibly be rejected from both worlds. And so when you do get rejected, you have to be, confident in your own beliefs, which if you're in the process of changing, you're not confident in your own beliefs. So that's why it's a difficult process. So anything you can do to not question the person's process or their identity is a good thing to do.
Just real quickly on this same thing I wanted to say that I think that for me, one of the struggles I had as a new convert, so I'm speaking to what Tom's talking about, it wasn't the congregation, it was that I somehow couldn't have now a childhood full of Yiddishkeit. It wouldn't fill in, even though I was a convert, and I felt sort of estranged because of that, and so that's an internal question of feeling authentic, because I couldn't undo all of those other things and suddenly have a history that people who grew up Jewish, especially Ashkenazi Jews, could have. So, okay, that's it.
Well, I've been Jewish all my life, but my father was Jewish. And my anger for a long time was the tradition that you're not a Jew if your mother wasn't a Jew. And I was forced to go through conversion because my father was Jewish. And I have to tell you, I had a lot of resentment against the traditional Judaism rules and regulations. So you don't have to be a non-Jew to go through conversion and feel like an outsider. I wanted to say that. So my father did everything he could possibly do to make me feel better, but it just didn't. My mother was nothing. My mother was an atheist, and it didn't bother her one way or the other. But my father really, he worked really hard, but I didn't get much support from the traditional Jewish rules.
Any other questions?
I just want to ask Tom, to you, who came up with the great name of Newish to Jewish?
Yes, that is a great.
Because it's fantastic. How did that come about? Not the whole procedure, just the name.
Well, I gotta give credit to Rabbi Karen, who just left, but
Oh.
she came up with it.
Perfect.
I just wanted, hearing Peggy's story, I'm really sorry to hear that and make sure everybody knows that within the Reform movement, that does not exist anymore. If either of your parents were Jewish and you were raised Jewish, you're considered Jewish.
Well, that's good to know.
I don't know when that changed exactly.
I don't either.
It hasn't been that
Well,
long.
it has to be new because this has been a long time ago.
It's maybe 20 or 30 years. I don't know.
That's
What
new.
tradition was your father? Was he conservative or what tradition
Well,
was he?
he was conservative to reform.
Okay, I think this has been a fascinating discussion, hearing the stories. Please give the people around. Thank you very much.
Oh, my
Yeah.
Remember a time. And I know how many times right? You know, the Jewish, the whole department store is being dirty because a temple was president.
Who's the best?
Yeah.
Worried about me?
We haven't got to you.
I haven't.
Hostage.
Yeah.